Okay, Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2. Read verses 1 through 12. And again, he, Jesus, entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was noised, or word spread, that he was in the house. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them, no, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them. And they come unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was borne or carried of 4. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, the multitude, they uncovered the roof where he was. And when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there, and reasoning in their hearts, Why doth this man thus speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, Why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether is it easier to say to the sick of the palsy, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise, and take up thy bed and walk? But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins, he saith to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise, and take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed, and glorified God, saying, We never saw it on this fashion. This, of course, is Mark's account of 4 individuals who carried paralytic on his bed to where Jesus was, and how that Jesus healed this man. Matthew, in Matthew chapter 9, verses 1 through 8, and Luke chapter 5, verses 17 through 26 also record this event, but Mark's account provides us with the most details. And it is from this account that we learn what took place on a return trip to Capernaum. Verse 1, and again he entered into Capernaum after some days. Again. So he had previously been there, and we know he had, because there he provided a miraculous catch of fish. There he taught in the synagogue. There he exercised his power in that synagogue, casting out a demon. And it was there in Capernaum, in the house of Simon Andrew, that he healed Peter's mother-in-law of fever, and has news spread that Jesus was in that house. A great multitude with the diseased and possessed had gathered at the door, and Jesus healed them. Again, back at the house of Simon and Andrew. And in the morning, Jesus rose before daylight to pray, and Simon and Andrew, James and John followed him, Mark chapter 1, verses 35 through 37. And they said, All men seek for thee. Jesus then went to the next towns, Mark chapter 1, verses 38 and 39. And after a few days, again, he entered into Capernaum. And due to what he had previously done in Capernaum, news spreads quickly, Mark 2, verse 1, that Jesus is back. Jesus is back. And it was noised that he was in the house. And I believe we can assume that it was the house of Simon and Andrew again. And as news spreads that Jesus is in the house, excitement begins to build. Mark 2, verse 2. And the people come in droves to that house, and he preached the word unto them. It's not what they went there for. It's not what they were expecting. They wanted the miraculous. But Jesus preached the word unto them. Now, gathering at that house that day, you have this great multitude of people from Capernaum. For the most part, they were spiritually indifferent. They were an uncommitted people. They were a people who merely wanted to witness the miraculous. That's why they're there. Overall, this would have been the character of the multitude that had gathered. So basically, they were curiosity seekers. Not really truly Christ seekers. But what will he do next? And reading the text, we learn that part of the multitude consisted of the scribes and the Pharisees, that is, the self-righteous religious hypocrites that made up the religious system of Christ's day. And they were there, again, not to seek Christ, but as always to criticize and to find fault. So there's a multitude. There are the scribes, there are the Pharisees gathered in and around the house. Neither have any real personal connection to Christ, no personal affection or knowledge of Christ. But when we come to verse 3, there are 5 individuals viewed separate and apart from the crowd that gathered. These 5 individuals are distinguished from the crowd by their faith. Matthew records, Matthew 9 verse 2, Jesus seen their faith. Mark says in Mark 2 verse 5, when Jesus saw their faith. Luke says in Luke 5 verse 20, and when he saw their faith. So 5 individuals, and note is taken of their faith. They had faith individually. They had faith collectively. And I believe they were harmonious in their faith. They had a faith that was visible. They had a faith that was manifested by their works. Now it is Mark and Luke that give us some details of their journey to that house, of their journey of faith to Christ. It is in Mark and Luke's account that we see the kind and character of their faith, and the kind and character of faith that God's people need today. In the gospel account of Jesus healing this man, there's much for our learning. There's much for our encouragement. There are several places where we can stop and place emphasis. Several places where we can stop and draw from. And several places where spiritual application can be made to everyone, regardless of their condition and need. But what we want to emphasize in this message is their faith. We want to speak on a faith that moves beyond and rises above. And true faith, that's what it does. Always. True faith. So our first point is, what caused these 5 individuals to press on toward Christ? Well, there was Jesus. The central fact of the account is Jesus was there. Verse 1, he was in the house. That's the central fact of the account. You take that away, there's nothing. So that's the central fact. Jesus was there. He is the central figure of the account. Luke writes in Luke 5 verse 17, and the power, that is the ability, the strength, the authority of the Lord was present to heal them. So Jesus was there, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. That is, that multitude that had gathered. Jesus was there. He was Lord, and He was able. So in that house, God in a body of flesh. In that house, in a body of flesh, was the Almighty, the Eternal, the Immortal, the Immutable, the Infinite, the Omniscient, the All-Sufficient One. In that house is the one who is above and beyond and greater than all. In that house is God's remedy and God's solution to all of man's problems. And He is God's provision for man's greatest need. So Jesus was in that house, and He's in that house as the manifestation of God's love, the manifestation of God's provision for man's needs. He's in that house as the manifestation of God's grace, His mercy, and His goodness. He's the central figure of the account. You remove Him, nothing else happens. In that house was the one who could impact and alter and transform death, darkness, hopelessness, weakness, anguish, defeat, uncertainty, and fear. In that house was the one who could bring individuals from the brink of destruction. Jesus was there in person. And as Luke says, He was there in power. Greater than all disease, greater than all need of body and soul, Jesus was there. And there was no condition, no situation, no sin, no enslavement, no problem, no disease, no plague, no affliction or need beyond His person and power. And everything regarding this miracle centers upon this fact. Jesus was there. And that brings us to the 5 individuals. There was a recognized and felt need. Matthew, in referring to this man, 3 times used the phrase sick of the palsy. Matthew 9, verses 2 and 6. Mark used the phrase 5 times in his account. And Luke uses the phrase 1 time. So in the 3 accounts, 9 times we are told that this man was sick of the palsy. The word sick is used to declare that he's in a suffering state. Luke in chapter 5 verse 18 speaks of the degree of the man's paralysis by saying a man was taken with a palsy. That is, he was overcome with it. He was seized by it. So it is a condition of helplessness. It is a condition that had an effect upon his entire life. The impact of this man's condition was so great that he was simply known by the palsy. That's what described his life. That's what defined his life. The palsy. And without a doubt, this man and the 4 who carried him, they knew he was paralyzed. They recognized that this was his condition. They knew and recognized this was his life. Both the man and the 4 who carried him knew. This is a need that is beyond ourselves. They knew that. It was a need beyond human ability. Again, they knew that. They knew. We need a miracle. They knew that. And in light of this, remember, there was Jesus, the miracle worker. There was not only a recognized and felt need. Again, there's a difference. You can recognize a need without feeling it. True recognition of a need, you will feel it also. There was a recognized and felt need. But then there was also a longing concerning the need. Without a doubt, the paralyzed man, the 4 who carried him, yearned for this man to be rid of his paralysis. They yearned for him to walk and to have his life restored. They had this desire. So there's the realization of a great need, a need that is beyond human ability, and there is a longing desire concerning that need. And in the light of that, there was Jesus. There was also faith in the person of Christ. Again, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that Jesus saw their faith. Faith is visible. Jesus saw their faith. Now, faith must have an object to act upon. Jesus was there, and He is the object of their faith. In Mark 2, verse 3, it is recorded, and they came unto Him. Him, Jesus, He's the object of their faith. Bringing one sick of the palsy, which was borne or carried of 4. And in verse 4, we see they came to where he was. Notice those 3 words, about halfway through verse 4. Where he was. This is the point they came to. Where he was. Faith will always bring you to that point. True faith. Where he was. Luke says, Luke 5 verse 19, he describes it as before Jesus. So Christ is the object of their faith. They have a need. They have a desire for the need to be met. They heard that Jesus was there. And the man with the paralysis and the 4 believed that they were absolutely convinced and persuaded that Jesus was bigger than the paralysis, and that Jesus was able to deliver, to cure, to restore the life of this one who is sick of the palsy. So they had faith. Now observe what this faith did. And this is still, what we see here is still the characteristic of true faith. Their faith moved them in the direction of Christ. They knew where Christ was. He was in the house. Again, we assume the house of Simon and Andrew. These individuals, fully conscious of great need, possessed with a desire concerning that need, and aware that where Jesus was, and believing and absolutely persuaded that Jesus was able, they move in the direction of Christ. Faith compelled them to move in that direction. They couldn't go anywhere else. These 4 and the paralyzed man were in unison in their faith. The paralytic, he was willing to be carried to where Jesus was, and the 4 were willing to carry him there. Now, we are not told of along the way to the house. We're not told anything of that. It picks up when they get to the house. We don't know what transpired. We don't know how far they had to travel. May have been a great distance. May have been a short distance. We don't know. But Mark and Luke pick up their accounts upon the arrival at the house. But I am sure that along the way, there were some obstacles. You're carrying a man on a bed, not the smoothest terrain. There were some difficulties. There were some rough spots. But their faith would not allow them to be deterred. Their faith would not allow them to be distracted or bogged down at any point of the journey. Faith would not allow it. But conscious of need, their hearts filled with a desire and believing that Christ was able, whatever transpired, they kept moving in the direction of Christ. That's what faith does. Faith doesn't quit. Faith keeps moving in the direction of Christ. And faith will always move you in the direction of Christ. It'll never move you away from Him. Never. Their faith also not only moved them in the direction of Christ, It moved them beyond the obstacles, beyond all that was between them and Christ. There will always be obstacles to the pursuit of faith. And there will always be many, many things, innumerable things, between us and Christ. But faith keeps on. Faith keeps on moving toward Christ. Now, when they arrived at the place, again, we're pretty certain that they had some obstacles before that. But when they arrived at the place where Jesus was, probably unexpectedly, they see a great multitude of people between them and Christ. And again, this is probably not what they were expecting. Perhaps they were disappointed of all the people. But they didn't get stuck there. Faith does not allow you to get stuck in disappointment. Luke tells us in Luke chapter 5, verse 18, that they sought means to bring him in, to bring him in the house. Why? Because Jesus was in that house. So they sought means. They knew that the man needed a miracle. They longed for a miracle. They knew that Christ was a great miracle worker. And they knew that Christ was in that house. So faith caused them to pursue a nearness to Christ. Faith will always seek nearness to the Lord. So there they are, with this man sick of the palsy on a bed, and this mass crowd is in the way. And they would go from one place to another place, zigzagging through the crowd, hoping to find some opening to the house. How long did that take? We have no idea. They may have done that for hours. I don't know. But it was to no avail. Luke records, Luke 5, verse 19, they could not find by what way they might bring him in the house because of the multitude. Mark says, notice in Mark chapter 2, verse 4, and when, notice those next three words, they could not come nigh unto him for the press. They could not get into that house. It was not possible. They tried, and they tried again and again and again. But they could not. They could not. The people were in the way. The people were an obstruction. Again, keep in mind, this is a self-seeking multitude. For the most part, a self-serving multitude, a self-indulgent crowd. And they were like a barrier between Christ and these five. People stood between them and Christ. That'll always be the case. But there's this sense of need. There's this felt need. And their faith tells them Christ is able to meet that need. And that faith would not allow them to get stuck in the crowd. Oh, how many of God's people are stuck in the crowd. That's where they're stuck. Some never get out of it. Faith will not allow you to be stuck in the crowd. Their sense of need and their faith that Christ was able to meet the need would not allow them to be deterred by the people that are in the way. There'll always be something in the way. I'm sure they were frustrated. I'm sure they become frustrated with the people. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. We're trying to get through here. They didn't budge. They didn't care. Like people today. That's your problem. And I'm sure they got frustrated. But they kept pursuing Christ. Why? Because that's what faith does. They could have brought this man back to his house, and he could have spent the rest of his life thinking to himself and telling everybody that would listen, I could have been healed, but all those people were in the way. Well, that wouldn't have been the reason. The reason would have been they didn't have enough faith to get through the people. You can't blame it on the people. Well, you can, but it's inaccurate. It's inaccurate. This man could have been brought back to his house, and he would have spent the rest of his life blaming the people. They wouldn't get out of the way for him. And how many do that? They get mad about something at church. I'm going to stay away. Who are you hurting? Yourself. The people. The people. The people. I would, but the people. No, you wouldn't. You would if you had faith. Faith will not allow you to get stuck in the crowd. They press on toward Christ. You see here what you have is a faith that had no other options. That's one of the major problems with God's people. They have a sort of faith, but they got a lot of other options. Well, if this don't work, we got this. This is a faith with no other option. This is a faith with no other alternative. A faith with no other course. They had a faith that would not accept distance from Christ. We've got to get in that house to where Jesus is. They were desperate for an experience of the almighty power of the Lord. Oh, for God's people to get desperate for an experience of the Lord. And their faith would not allow them to get stuck anywhere short of Christ. So after going from one place to another, trying to make a pathway through the multitude, Luke says in Luke 5, verse 19, they went upon the housetop. 4 individuals carrying a man on a bed, and someone says, let's try the roof. And they went up upon the housetop. No easy task. Someone of the group says, perhaps the man himself on the bed, well, let's try the roof. Someone may have said, well, that's going to be kind of hard. But faith pressed on. That's what faith does. So when they get up on the rooftop, what's happened? They've risen above the crowd. That's what faith does. Faith won't allow you to get stuck in the crowd. Faith will rise you above the crowd. Faith will rise you above the people who stand in the way. There will always be people in the way. But faith rises you above it. So after struggling, I'm sure, getting to the roof with the man upon the bed, there they are in the roof. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do? Still not in the house. They know that Jesus is down below in that house. They can't see him. They can't see exactly where he is in the house. So I picture them moving around upon the roof, following, trying to follow the muffled sound of his voice. And they eventually come to a place, and again, we don't know how much time this took, and they perceive he's right below us. He's right below us. But once again, something's in the way. What's in the way? The roof. It's in the way. It's an obstacle. There'll always be obstacles. Today, what we do, what most do, well, I believe that God is able. And you go a little while, there's an obstacle. Well, obvious this isn't the Lord's will, so you go another way. There's another obstacle. Oh, this can't be the Lord's will. Go another way. There's another obstacle, because there's always obstacles. Faith does not get stopped by obstacles. So now they've risen above one obstacle, the crowd. Now they have another one, the roof. The roof. There's something between them and him. They have gone through the task of getting the man sick of the palsy up on the roof. I imagine they're quite tired. And now there's another problem. But again, very much aware of great need, with a strong desire to have that need met, and aware that Jesus is right below, and believing and absolutely persuaded that he was able. Mark says in Mark 2 verse 4, they uncovered the roof where he was, and when they had broken it up. Now they would have had to make a hole about 4 by 6, but desperate for a miracle, they began to remove the clay between them and Christ. And they continued to do so until they have a large enough opening to let the man down on his bed through the roof. And Luke records in Luke 5 verse 19, they let him down through the tiling with his couch in the midst before Jesus. Faith caused them to press on toward Jesus, moving beyond the difficulties on the way to the house, moving beyond the obstacles of the people and the clay, until this man sick of the palsy is before Jesus. And that's where faith will bring you, before Jesus. That's where it will bring you, before Jesus. Faith knows no journey, no obstacle, no work to be too great. Faith longs for Christ. They knew that Jesus was there. They knew that in Him was the help they needed. In Him was the healing they needed. In Him was the relief they needed. In Him was the joy and the fulfillment that they needed. And they press on toward Him. If you truly know those things, that's what you do. So in closing, let's make application to ourselves. Again, we do not know how far these four carried this man. Nor do we know how long it took them to get to that house or to get close enough to the roof. We do not know how long it took them to break up the roof, how long it took them to lower the bed down through the roof. But none of it was easy. But faith enabled them to press on, regardless. We see four individuals carrying a man sick of the palsy upon a bed to Christ. And it's a beautiful picture. It's a picture that ought to encourage us. It ought to embolden us. It ought to fill us with passion and zeal and resolve and commitment to press on toward Christ. In this case, on that gurney, on that bed, was a man sick of the palsy. But you place whatever you want on that gurney, on that bed. Desperate situations, desperate conditions, needs, cares, burdens of all kinds, difficulties, problems, trials, pressures, afflictions. Put whatever you want on that bed. And here's what you do. Press on toward Christ. Believing, fully persuaded that He is able to meet that need, whatever it is, on that gurney. And though the mood and the current and the trend of the world is anti-Christ and presents one obstruction after another, there is Jesus. And He's sufficient for everything that comes your way. Get to Him. Get to Him. Well, how do I do that? Faith. A faith that is strong enough to get past all obstacles. You have to get to Him. Press on toward Him through all the obstacles. Wherever you may be today, whatever you may be going through, whatever your need, that's really not the issue. That's not the main thing. There is Jesus. That's the main thing. That's the central fact. There is Jesus. And as Luke said in Luke 5, verse 17, He's present to heal. He's present to do the miraculous. Oh, for a faith that will press on toward Him. People are very good, in a bad way, at reasoning, letting human reason to overcome faith. Human reasoning says, no way I'm climbing up on that roof. There's no way. Human reasoning says, well, we tried, let's go home. But faith moves past human reasoning. Let's go up on the roof. That doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That wouldn't be safe. And oh man, you get a long list of reasons why we're not going up on that roof. But we don't know how strong that roof is. We might fall through. Well, guess what? If you did, where would you be? Where would you be? You'd be where he is. Press on toward him. Getting past all human reasoning. Don't reason away Christ. Don't reason that way. Well, I'm just using common sense. No, you're being foolish. Faith moves beyond. Faith moves beyond. Oh, for this faith. Brother Ben, if you'll come and